Hebrews 11:27 says that Moses left Egypt so that he could walk in faith by God. And there's so many stories that are going to come out of that journey of faith and confronting fears that Moses went through. When I was a little kid, I was afraid of sheep. Now that sounds pretty funny, but I was actually in a flock and my brother was trying to drive them through a building to load the sheep, and one of them knocked me over. I was probably 10 years old, and I was terrified after that. So the next time we gathered sheep together, I did the natural thing. When a flock of sheep come running toward a certain direction, I just stood out of the way and let them run. That was not going to work. So my brother, he was so wise in that moment. He had a ram that was just huge. I mean, it was a big ram, a Suffolk ram that probably weighed close to 200 pounds. And that ram was so gentle, but I really did not know that. And so he took me and lifted me up in a pen with that ram. And he said, "You're going to stand here until you stop crying and until you get rid of your fear." Well, I had no choice. There I was. And finally, I went over to the ram, who was just standing there looking at me like, "Why are you afraid anyway?" And I began to pet him on the forehead. And I had a friend. And I also got rid of my enemy, which was fear. There's a story in the Bible about the leaving of Egypt and what happened then. And Moses, when he took the people out, he sent out spies to the new land where he was supposed to go. He knew God had called him. So he just wanted to be wise and look at the strategy of how to get through the enemy territory. And 12 men went out. 12 men came back, but they told very different stories. Fear sees with completely different eyes. 10 of the individuals began to grumble, and they said, "Oh, the land is filled with giants, and we look like grasshoppers in their eyes." How did they know how they looked in the eyes of those people? And so the people became afraid. They began to grumble. And in the end, the people wandered 40 years in the wilderness, terrified to go into the promised land. When they finally got there later, there were 2 men who were not afraid to go and take the land. They looked with the eyes of faith at their situation, and they reacted completely differently. Those men said, "We can take it. We can take the giants of the land." And they said the fruit, the grapes are huge, the clusters, why it takes 2 men to carry them on a pole between them, the clusters of grapes. They must have been adding a little value to the story, but that's how they saw it. When they finally took the land 40 years later, and the unbelieving generation had died because because fear is incompatible with faith. So after those people had died and they'd taken the land, they got the word from the captured people: "We've been terrified for you for 40 years because we heard what your God did in bringing the people out of Egypt. For 40 years, they wandered needlessly in the wilderness and they lived in fear when they didn't need to." What's your fear today? Could you name it? Could you confront it like that ram that was in the pen with me? Can you look at it and say, if I'm afraid of an elevator, I've got to get in. If I'm afraid of a spider, I either get to live forever in fear of spiders or I get to stomp on it with my foot. If I'm afraid, you name it, whatever it is, do the opposite that fear would demand and do exactly what faith would demand. Because the eyes of fear and the eyes of faith cause us to speak differently and to influence others differently, and the one is much greater than the other. In our journey of faith, one a day, let's be people of faith. God bless you today.